A tiny island in the middle of the Caribbean where most people speak English but are in fact Dutch nationals. This is Sint Eustatius, a tropical municipality of the Netherlands. Hello and welcome to 7 Facts. Sint Eustatius is a small island of the West Indies, home to 3,100 people. It is one of the territories that form the so-called Caribbean Netherlands. To understand how small this place is, at its longest, Sint Eustatius stretches only 10 kilometers. Despite this, it kinda has everything: a rich and diverse wildlife, some industry, a port, an airport, and even a solar park that provides half the island's electricity needs. For all intents and purposes, this is very much an unknown corner of the Caribbean. Which means we have plenty of fact to talk about today. The history of Sint Eustatius is quite complicated. We don't really know if the island was inhabited by anyone when Europeans first arrived in 1493. The Dutch West India Company set up camp here in 1636 and opened tobacco and sugar plantations. The island was neutral and had a free port with no customs duties, so it was a major trade and contraband center. In 1776, Sint Eustatius was actually the first place to acknowledge the independence of the United States by performing a gun salute for an American brig, thus recognizing its flag. Not only that, but Sint Eustatius was a major player in the American Revolution. Being a free port, they supplied nearly half of all military supplies needed by the Continental Army. This really pissed off the British, who actually went to war with the Dutch in 1780. In that war, a certain admiral, George Bridges Rodney, occupied the island and plundered it. And did a bit more than that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. After this, the French came in, then the Dutch took over again. To make this short, between the 17th and the 19th centuries, Sint Eustatius changed hands 21 times between the Netherlands, Britain and France. 21 times! For an island of 21 square kilometers. Plus, there was a slave revolt in the mid-1800s, then a recession, and hurricanes that destroyed the island several times. The multitude of disasters turned the island from a bustling center of 20,000 people in 1780 to 921 by 1948. To say that Sint Eustatius had it rough is a gross understatement. The capital of Sint Eustatius is Oranjestad, not to be confused with the other Oranjestad, the capital of Aruba, another Dutch territory. The town developed around Fort Oranje, a well-maintained fortification that still stands today. Oranjestad still has colonial-era buildings, but most of the warehouses, bars and places of entertainment for the thousands of sailors who once docked here are now ruins. The upper town portion, though, still has a restored historic core, a delight to any visitor and history enthusiast. Oranjestad might not have been on your bucket list, but as you can see, this small town is well worth a visit. When the Dutch government decided to move away from a colonial administration, they didn't just offer independence to everyone. In the Caribbean, they dissolved their former colonies and instead formed a new entity, the Netherlands Antilles, an autonomous country within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. But grouping several islands with different histories and cultures is not really a good idea. So, 56 years after its creation, the Netherlands Antilles was dissolved in 2010 and the islands went their separate ways, although still under a Dutch umbrella. Interestingly though, the people of Sint Eustatius did not vote for the dissolution of the country. They wanted to remain within the Netherlands Antilles. But they were the only ones, so when the country ceased to exist, Sint Eustatius voted to become a municipality within Netherlands. This means that the people are Dutch citizens and by extension European citizens, and the island is proper Dutch territory. They're not part of the EU though, they're an overseas territory. And they do not use the euro as their currency, but the US dollar. Whether this state of affairs will work out or not, I'll guess we'll see in the future. Probably the last thing you might expect to hear about Sint Eustatius is that the island had a major Jewish community. They were present ever since the beginning, and at one point made up 10% of the island's population. And that's where that British admiral that I was talking about comes in. After Rodney captured Sint Eustatius, he ordered the gathering of the entire Jewish population. Dozens of Jews, all heads of families, were immediately deported to St. Kitts, where there were no Jewish communities, to aid the refugees. The resentment the British felt for the people that helped the Americans was great, and the entire population was badly treated. But Rodney singled out the Jews. The harshness was reserved for them alone. He did not do the same to French, Dutch, Spanish, or even the American merchants on the island. He permitted the French to live with all their possessions, but confiscated and sold the possessions of Jewish merchants. And that's put mildly. He confiscated Jewish warehouses, looted their personal possessions, he even cut the lining of their clothes to find money hidden in there. He even dug up the Jewish cemetery to find additional treasures. After the British left, some Jews did come back, but by 1815 there was no more Jewish community to talk about. Today, all that's left of their heritage is the ruined synagogue and the maintained Jewish cemetery. While Sint Eustatius is a tropical island, tourism is not the main economic activity here. The government is the largest employer and an oil terminal is the largest private enterprise. Still, tourism is a pretty big deal. Being a volcanic island, the beaches of Sint Eustatius are covered in black sand, which in itself is an experience on its own. Diving, though, is where the money's at, if you're into that kind of thing, that is. While there is an airport here, it can't handle large planes, and the port is not suitable for cruise ships, so there is no way to bring large groups of tourists here. But that's actually a good thing. You won't have any trouble finding accommodations here. Aside from the beaches, the history and the diving, there's one more thing to behold in Sint Eustatius: the Quill. If you haven't guessed already, the Quill is a volcano. Don't worry, it's dormant now. The Quill formed some 32,000 years ago and last erupted around 400 AD. Inside the crater, there's a lush rainforest full of typical wildlife, and there are numerous trails for hikers. Oh, and here's a fun fact: since Sint Eustatius is part of the Netherlands, this volcano counts as the second highest peak in the country at 601 meters above sea level. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Leave your comments downstairs and don't forget there's a Patreon page where you can support this channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye.